Boop, 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 boop. Tangzhong. Channel. My name is Brianna and I own Butternut Bakery here in Westminster, Colorado. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make my favorite dinner roll. They're called Hokkaido milk bread rolls, and we're going to do a tear and share version today that will feed a big family, but we'll talk about different variations that you can use depending on what you're going to serve them with and how you want to create your perfect dinner roll. So what I love about this recipe is that we're going to be using an interesting method, Tangzhong method. This is basically where we add a little bit of the liquid to some flour, heat it up, and pre-gelatinize the starch. Now I know that sounds real sciencey and scary, but in fact it creates some wonderful characteristics within your roll. So to begin with, we need to start our Tangzhong. Generally, it's a 5-to-1 ratio, liquid to flour. So in my little saucepan here, I have my flour, and to that I'm going to be adding milk and water. You can do all milk or all water, but I like this particular combination. So we're just gonna get this started heating here. And I'm gonna start by adding the water, just whisking around. The idea here at the beginning is just to add enough to kind of get this into a smooth, clump-free mixture. So at first it looks kind of disjointed, but I promise you it will come together. I'm gonna use my spatula to kind of liberate some of this from my whisk. And what we're looking for here is to bring this to a very thick paste-like consistency. So with this Tangzhong method, essentially we're just creating a roux, and this will help to lock some of the moisture up into the starches in the flour. This does several things. It'll help to lock in the moisture so that we're working essentially with a slightly less wet dough, which makes it more easy to handle, less sticky on the hands. It also creates a more tender crumb. You can see that it's kind of already starting to thicken. So this part just takes a couple minutes of prep at the beginning of your bread making adventure, but I promise you it is going to pay off when you see the result of this awesome roll. The other cool thing about this Tangzhong is, like I mentioned, it helps the roll to retain moisture for days past the time that you bake it. And it does that by kind of keeping the moisture locked up in those starches and holding water in the crumb so that it tastes and feels more moist. All right, that's looking good. So as you can see, we've come to a much thicker paste here, and we want this to cool off, because if it goes into our mixture with the rest of our bread ingredients too hot, it will really overheat the yeast and kill it. Now I'm not measuring the temperature of this, but really our goal is for it to reach 165 degrees. That's the point at which your starch will gelatinize or absorb this water. All right, I think that looks good. So we're gonna take this off the heat. I'm just gonna transfer it to a little dish to kind of cool off. All right, so I'm just gonna clean up and we'll start our dough. So now we're ready to begin our dough. And this is really a simple dough. We're going to be using milk and eggs as our liquid ingredients. We've got a little bit of softened butter, and then yeast, salt, and for this recipe, we'll use a little bit of dry milk powder. If you don't have this, it's perfectly fine. You can just leave it out. But this contributes a nice flavor, and it also helps to tenderize the crumb of your dinner roll, so it makes it a little bit softer, a little bit more enjoyable to eat. And then of course the Tangzhong that we mixed, that we have cooling here. So we're going to begin by adding to our stand mixer our milk. I have about 200 milliliters of milk. I've whisked up 2 eggs and 1 egg yolk. We're going to add that as well. Now often bakers will kind of start with the paddle attachment just to get things going. You certainly can do that, absolutely. Here I have just regular all-purpose flour, 516 grams. To that I'm going to add 11 grams of salt. I'm going to put that on one side of the bowl, and then I'm going to add my yeast, 11 grams of yeast, instant yeast, to the other side of the bowl. Salt and yeast can interact in a way that kind of neutralizes the yeast or deactivates it. So we don't want to just set them right on top of one another as we're kind of whisking our dry ingredients together. I like to put them on either side of the bowl. And then to that, we're going to add 32 grams of our dry milk powder, like so. And I'm just going to give that an initial whisking. Certainly the stand mixer is going to do most of the work here. We're just going to mix this around just till it's nicely incorporated. Now at this point in time, if you wanted to add some dried seasonings, you certainly could do that. You could add some garlic powder here. You could add in some dried herbs if you would like, if you're going for a specific flavor profile. But for this, we're just going plain and simple today because as it is, it's a delicious recipe. So we're going to get our bread whisking here, or get our dough mixed up. So I'm just going to turn on our mixer just on a low speed as I slowly incorporate the flour. If you don't have some flour coming out on the sides of your stand mixer, you're just not doing it right. You have to have a little bit of a mess. At least I do. And now we have our cool Tangzhong, where you can see it's thickening even a little bit more as it's cooling. That's exactly what we want. So this is just over room temperature. You don't want it any hotter than about 105 degrees. And we're going to add that in as well. Other variations that you can try is using a little bit of canned pumpkin. If you'd like to have your dough kind of have a beautiful pumpkin-y color to it and just a little subtle sweetness. It won't add much to your flavor, but it really does make for a beautiful dinner roll. Now, at this point, our dough has come together and all of the dry bits are mixed into the wet. At this point, we could stop the mixer and let it rest for 10 minutes. That is called an autolyse stage, where it just allows the moisture to kind of mingle with the proteins inside the flour and get the ball rolling, so to speak, on gluten formation. And it also just kind of helps everything hydrate, and it makes your mix time a little bit shorter in the end. So what we'll do here is stop. We'll take 10 minutes and have a sip of coffee if we want to, and then we'll come back and start adding our butter. All right, so I'm just gonna show you what our dough looks like after that little bit of rest. So you definitely should have a dough that you can handle. It's not really sticky, but it is kind of pliable and workable. So we're going to now add gradually in our butter, and this is going to turn this dough into a supple, beautiful, smooth ball. So we're gonna start this just again kind of on a low speed. I'm just gonna add about a tablespoon at a time. This butter is soft to the touch, so as I press it, you can see it kind of indenting. This is exactly what we want. It'll incorporate into the dough, and as each piece incorporates, then you kind of add your next piece. The dough might kind of look like it's falling apart a little bit as it's incorporating this butter in, but I promise you it will all come together nicely. Now, if you don't have a stand mixer, you certainly can knead this dough by hand, absolutely. It might take a little bit longer, so for convenience sake today we're using the stand mixer. This is 67 grams of butter. I like to use cultured butter. It just has a nice additional kind of complexity of flavor than traditional American butters. Now, as I'm looking in there, it's like a disaster. It looks like, oh my goodness, this is going totally wrong. Have no fear, just have faith, keep it mixing. You're gonna have a beautiful, smooth ball of dough here in a few minutes. All right, so our bread mixed for about 5 to 8 minutes. Basically what we're looking for is for it to just kind of smooth out a bit. So I'm gonna take it out here and we're gonna work it with our hands to kind of get it into the shape that we want it to proof in. So you can kind of see this supple, pliable dough that we have here. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of kneading by hand just to kind of finish it and work it into a nice circle. So you can see the dough is not sticking to my hands at all. That's partially because of that Tangzhong that we use. It kind of locks up some of that extra moisture, so it's in the dough and it's going to make our bread, you know, beautiful and delicious when we eat it, our rolls. But for working with it, now we don't have such a wet dough that it's unmanageable or really difficult to handle. So you know when you're done mixing this dough, when you've kind of got it into a shape like this, and you press it and you see it bounce back. So that's kind of an indication that you're done mixing and now you're ready to move on to the bulk fermentation. So this first rise allows the dough to kind of fill up with carbon dioxide gas as the yeast start to digest and eat some of the sugars in the flour, the carbohydrates in the flour. All right, so I got it into this really beautiful kind of nice ball here. And we're going to just grease our bowl here. Any container will work. And I'm gonna put it seam side down. You can kind of see underneath, there's a little bit of a seam. So got it pulled into kind of a nice taut ball. I'm just gonna set it down in there to rise. I like to use shower caps to cover my bowls. So we are going to let this guy rise for about an hour. Like I said, it just kind of depends. If you're working in the winter and your ingredients were straight from the refrigerator and they were already cold, it might just take a little bit longer for this to happen. Give it about an hour, come back, check it. What we're looking for is roughly for it to double in size and to look just very light and voluminous. All right, so our bread has finished its first bulk fermentation stage. Look how beautiful that is. Now you hear bakers say punch it down. What we're really doing is just kind of degassing it so that it can then fill up again with air in its second rise. The second rise is going to be after it's been shaped. So that's what we're going to do right now. I want to make 18 tear and share buns for this recipe. So I've got a greased 9x13 baking pan that we're going to be using. To scale these appropriately, I love using my food scale, as you know. So I'm going to set my bowl on the food scale and zero it out, and this will help give me the weight of my full batch of dough, and then I'll be able to partition it into little buns equally. So I'm gonna just dump it out onto a non-floured surface and set that bowl back on there. So I have 1,125 grams, and so 18 buns is going to give me 62 gram buns. Now what I do is I just kind of flatten this out. And if you don't have time to do it with a food scale and you don't want to be that precise, that's totally fine. I just enjoy symmetry. I enjoy having things very equal. So I'm just going to kind of divide this up here. So for 18, I'm going to need about 9 per half. And I'm just going to scale these. The idea is to try to get them as close to the 62 as possible. But if you have to add little bits of dough, that's perfectly fine. And so for the shaping, we're just going to, we have all the little bits, we're going to tuck them underneath and then set them on the counter, forming kind of a C with your hand and rolling. So you don't want to have a really floured surface because you want that dough to stick a little bit to your work surface so that you can get a really beautiful taut bun. Again, so here I'm just kind of tucking under and forming it into a little ball. You can see the seam underneath there, but then I'm going to set it on the counter and give it a little bit of a roll here. This is the part that I really enjoy, where you get to, get your hands on the dough, have fun shaping it. The better shape you achieve now, the better they're going to look. So it's worth spending a little time kind of really getting a nice round taut dough ball there. So our plan here is to allow these to proof till they're, like I said, double in size, and then we're gonna put them in the oven. We're gonna use a 350-degree oven today, pretty standard. We're gonna egg wash them to give them a really nice sheen right before they go into the oven. You want to avoid tearing the dough because that can really weaken the gluten strands. And your gluten, if you think about it, is kind of like a balloon. And so the air the carbon dioxide that's released by the yeast are kind of inflating that balloon. But if your balloon has a weakness, then that air can escape and you'll have basically a deflated balloon, or kind of a sad, flat little dinner roll. So our goal is to retain the integrity of the gluten as we're doing this. So as I mentioned, you'd like to aim for as close to your scaled weight as possible without making too many different cuts in your dough. So now we're going to cover these with a grease-proof plastic wrap, or you can certainly wrap them in like a food-safe bag. So these are gonna hang out for another hour covered, and then we'll get ready to bake. So right now you wanna preheat your oven to 350 degrees, and we'll let these guys do their thing. So our buns are done with their final proof. I'm gonna take them out of the bag. They've doubled in size. They look beautiful. So now we've got our egg wash prepared. All I did was scramble up one egg and mix it with just a tablespoon of regular milk. You can also use heavy whipping cream if you'd like. An interesting little fact about most home ovens is that when they sound the alarm that they're preheated, generally they're still very far off from the actual temperature that you're aiming for. So as a good rule of thumb, you want to give your oven probably an additional 15 to 30 minutes of preheating after the alarm has sounded telling you that it's at the desired temperature. Then you can be pretty confident that you actually are in fact there and that you'll be baking your bread at the correct temperature, as you would if you were baking at the correct temperature. I've just coated all of them, but I don't have puddles underneath. So they're ready to go in the oven. I'm gonna set them in the middle rack, 350, 25 minutes, check them. You don't wanna open the oven door before that because you let a lot of the heat out and then you have a massive drop in your temperature of your oven. So give them 25 minutes, take a peek, see what they look like, and if they need to go a little longer, so be it. I've got my trusted companion with me today to do the final taste test. Do you smell those buns? What do you think about those buns? Are you ready to try? So as you can see, we have a beautiful sheen on these from our egg wash. They baked beautifully, 25 minutes in the oven, and you have the most wonderful dinner roll. Let's try them. You can kind of see how light, fluffy. I mean, these things are full of air. You push them down. Oh, now you're gonna try, huh? They just fill right back up. Look at that beautiful inside. Buttery, tender, beautiful. Let's give it a try, huh? You wanna give it a try? What do you think? Oh, wow, help yourself. Perfect. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. We'll hopefully be back with more fun videos like this. You're back for another bite?